right in. We're opening up excerpts from a daily Bible study today,
Hmm.
looking specifically at the very beginning of the book of Exodus. We're talking chapter 1, verses 8 through 22.
Yeah, this is really where things start to shift dramatically for the Israelites in Egypt.
Exactly. For generations, they'd lived in peace, maybe even favor because of Joseph's whole legacy.
Right.
But this study, it really zeroes in on verse 8, describing the arrival of a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph.
And that phrase is just loaded, isn't it? It
Yeah.
signals the end of an era.
Totally.
And what's really significant, as the material points out, this isn't just recounting history.
Right.
This specific passage, it kind of sets the stage for the great act of deliverance that defines the book of Exodus. It immediately brings in this fundamental idea that even right here, with oppression rising, God sees, cares, and acts on behalf of his people.
Okay, so for this deep dive then, our mission is to really unpack the key events and I guess the powerful themes presented right here in this passage.
Yeah, how does this initial suffering, how does it actually set the stage for what God's going to do?
And crucially, what insights does this offer you, listening today, wherever you might find yourself? So let's start with this new Pharaoh. What's his deal?
Well, the shift is pretty dramatic because this new ruler, he doesn't see the Israelites through that lens of Joseph's contribution anymore.
No.
He sees them purely through fear. The study really emphasizes his concern, quoting verse 9, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us."
Ah, okay. So it's fear. That's the driver.
That fear is absolutely the engine driving everything that comes next.
Okay, so fear's the motivation. What's his first move then to deal with this perceived threat?
His initial strategy is, well, it's brutal, but maybe calculated in his mind. He enslaves them,
Right.
forces them into harsh labor to build his cities. It's clearly an attempt to control their population, their power.
Break their spirit.
Yeah, break their spirit, exhaust them, maybe even hoping the hardship would, diminish their numbers.
But, okay, here's where something really unexpected happens, right? Something the text itself points out very clearly. You'd think this kind of oppression would just grind people down, make them shrink back.
Absolutely. It seems totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? But verse 12 gives us the opposite outcome. It says, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad.
Wow. Okay, that's remarkable resilience. Or maybe something more.
Well, the study frames this as the first glimpse of God's hand in this story.
Ah, okay.
It suggests that even in these, really dark moments of suffering, God's ancient promise,
The one to Abraham.
exactly, the one made to Abraham about his descendants becoming a great nation, that promise is still active. It's still working.
So Pharaoh's efforts, they just can't stop it.
Right. It shows that Pharaoh's most concerted efforts, his schemes, they cannot thwart the purposes of God.
That's a powerful statement right at the beginning.
It really is. His first plan, enslavement designed to crush them, actually leads to their increase.
So, okay, enslavement fails to stop their growth. Pharaoh must be getting frustrated. He escalates, right? What's the next step he takes?
He does. He escalates. And he targets the most vulnerable imaginable, the newborn boys.
Oh, wow.
He commands the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, tells them to kill every single male infant at birth.
That's just chilling, going right after the future of the people.
Absolutely. It's genocidal intent.
But the response from these two women, Shiphrah and Puah, it's pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
It really is.
The study highlights that they fear God more than Pharaoh. I mean, think about that choice.
Yeah, it's huge. They make this incredibly courageous decision to defy his orders, allowing the boys to live.
And their faithfulness, in what must have been an incredibly dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually acknowledged, right?
It is. The text says God blesses them, give them families of their own. It's this quiet but profound act of resistance, and it's grounded entirely in their faith.
It really brings up that question of obedience, doesn't it? Who do you ultimately answer to?
Exactly. But Pharaoh, he's not done yet. When this plan also seems to falter, his frustration just boils over.
And that leads to his most extreme decree, the most public one.
Yes. The text in verse 22 says he commands all his people, not just the officials now.
Everyone.
Everyone. Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile.
That's state-sanctioned infanticide involving the whole population.
It's the absolute low point.
Yeah.
This brings the situation to its most dire moment. The people are facing the deepest suffering, this direct threat of annihilation for their male children.
Unimaginable.
Yet the study draws this really profound connection right here. It suggests that it is precisely in this darkness that God begins his work in deliverance.
Wow. So the moment of deepest pain is actually the launching pad for the rescue.
That's the perspective offered. The very bottom becomes the starting point for Jem's intervention.
Okay. Wow. So let's maybe shift gears a bit then and talk about the core themes, the reflections that the study encourages us to pull from this really intense opening chapter. What are the big takeaways here?
Well, one of the central ideas, maybe the foundational one, is that God is always aware of his people's suffering.
Even when they must have felt completely forgotten, right? Just toiling away, facing these horrific decrees.
Absolutely. It's hard to imagine they didn't feel abandoned. But the point the narrative makes is that their situation, their suffering, it didn't escape God's notice. He saw.
So even when it feels like God is distant.
Exactly. Even in those moments where God's presence seems distant, where circumstances seem unbearable, the study argues God's plan was still unfolding.
So the hardship wasn't a sign that God had checked out.
No, quite the opposite in a way. It wasn't neglect, but somehow part of a larger story that was being written, even if they couldn't see it then.
Which makes it clear that Pharaoh's oppression, for all its, might and cruelty, it could not stop God's covenant promises.
Right. The attempt to destroy them, it ultimately couldn't derail God's long-term purpose for them.
And this leads to, I think you said, maybe the most powerful conclusion the study draws.
Yeah, I think so. It's that the oppression itself became the stage for his deliverance.
The stage?
The very thing meant to crush them became the necessary prelude, the backdrop for their eventual freedom.
Okay, that's a really significant reframing. So how does this connect then directly to you, the person listening right now?
Well, the study makes some very pointed applications.
It starts by acknowledging that feeling we all know, right? Feeling forgotten in our struggles, just like the Israelites must have felt.
Definitely. And it speaks right into those seasons where God's presence seems distant, where circumstances seem unbearable. We've all had times like that.
Yeah.
But the core teaching from Exodus 1, according to this material, it stands as this counter-truth to that feeling.
Yeah.
It says God sees, God cares, and God is working.
Even if we can't see it.
Often in ways we cannot yet perceive. Exactly. It challenges us to look beyond the immediate pain or confusion.
And then it poses some pretty direct questions for us to think about.
It does. Like, how can we trust God's timing in our own difficult circumstances? That's a big one.
And also, are there areas in our lives where fear or doubt have overshadowed our faith in God's promises?
Yeah, those are challenging questions. They require some honest reflection.
And then there's this direct message of reassurance pulled straight from this passage.
Which is?
Just as God saw the oppression of his people in Egypt, he sees you today. He knows your pain, your burdens, and your struggles. It just takes that ancient truth and brings it right here, right now.
Yeah, that personal connection is vital.
Yeah.
And based on that assurance, the encouragement is to trust that his timing is perfect, even when the answers seem delayed.
So the delay isn't denial. It's not absence.
Right. It's part of the process, part of the unfolding story, just like it was in Egypt.
Okay. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, the main takeaway from this study feels like a really crucial one. Remember that God's deliverance often begins in the midst of difficulty.
It starts in the darkness.
Yeah.
Not necessarily when things get easy.
Right.
And the study leaves us with a practical suggestion, too. Calls it a closing challenge.
What's that?
It says, this week, take time to reflect on God's faithfulness in your past struggles. Journal moments where you felt God's presence in times of suffering, and thank him for his care.
That's good. A way to make it concrete, to personally anchor these truths from Exodus.
Exactly. Build that personal history of trust.
Okay, and maybe here's the thought to carry with you after this discussion, something that really comes out of this passage. How does understanding that the absolute depth of difficulty, like what the Israelites faced, can actually be the beginning stage for deliverance? How does that change how you perceive and maybe navigate the challenging moments you face in your own life today?
That's a powerful question to sit with.